Ryan, tell us what's on your radar.
So on Wednesday, Jack Keane made one of his many appearances this week on cable news, helping viewers sort through the disorienting situation in Kabul in the wake of the Taliban takeover of the country. Here's how Keane was introduced for his segment.
General Jack Keane, retired four-star U.S. Army general, Fox News senior strategic analyst, and chair of the Institute for the Study of War.
Retired four-star general, a good source on questions of military strategy for sure. Let's hear his take.
I think the administration made a terrible mistake in pulling our troops out and giving the Taliban the opportunity to take the country over. And now we're going to inherit an epicenter of radical Islam right inside of Afghanistan. It's going to become a more dangerous place, threatening America, and the world's a more dangerous place.
Earlier in the week, he'd attacked the withdrawal plan as embarrassing and ill-conceived.
And we should have extended our withdrawal out until sometime next year to get all of that done.
What neither Keane nor the host mentioned to the audience is that he has more than merely a patriotic interest in the continued occupation. Keane, a former board member at weapons maker General Dynamics, is executive chairman of AM General, the company that makes Humvees. He also sits on the board of Kyalum Technologies, which manufactures military chem lights and other technology deployed on the battlefield in Afghanistan. Keane was just one of a parade of ex-military officials who appeared on air this week to castigate the Biden administration for its withdrawal or for the way it was carried out. Yet despite being described to their respective audiences by their time in the military, cable anchors universally skipped over their current professional occupations as representatives of the defense industry, which has seen extraordinary profits from the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. Among the other talking heads taking either to cable or to op-ed pages without disclosing their defense industry ties were David Petraeus, Rebecca Grant, Richard Haas, and Condoleezza Rice. There are plenty of others, but this show is on early, and it was getting late last night. It's not hard to find them. Just watch for a general or some other national security expert and Google them, then click a few layers deeper, and you'll find their ties to the military-industrial complex. David Petraeus, the retired four-star general who leaked classified information to his mistress and biographer, is a partner at KKR, a global private equity firm with assets in the defense secretary. In early 2020, KKR bought Novaria Group, a corporation holding a growing number of aerospace manufacturers. He called the withdrawal a, quote, Dunkirk moment on Fox News, and he told the BBC, "We should literally reverse the decision," adding, "I feared we would come to regret the decision, and we already are. There's no good outcome unless the United States and its allies recognize that we made a serious mistake." Richard Haas, described on MSNBC as the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, questioned the decision to withdraw, as well as leveling criticism at the way it was handled.
To me, the first order question is why the policy? But then, as we used to teach when I taught in the School of Government, a lot of life is implementation or execution. So even when I think an incorrect policy was selected here by the president, obviously against many of the advice he was receiving from the military and others, why it wasn't carried out better? Well, that'll be the stuff of history books and investigations for some time to come.
Haas did not mention that he sits on the board of investment firm Lazard, which, quote, actively serves companies in the industrial sector, including aerospace and defense. Nor did he mention his role with Palantir, a leading tech firm in the defense intelligence space. Rebecca Grant penned a column for Fox News, arguing that the blame for the chaos in Afghanistan rests squarely with Biden and Secretary of State Tony Blinken. To its credit, Fox noted in her bio that as head of Iris Independent Research, quote, she has specialized in research for government and aerospace industry clients. When she appeared on CNN Monday to make the same case, viewers were not told of her defense industry ties, but merely that she was a national security analyst. Stanley McChrystal previously advised Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to just, quote, muddle along in Afghanistan, according to leaked audio. He's appeared on television as well. A retired four-star general and former commander of NATO's mission in Afghanistan, muddling along would be good for business for McChrystal, who sits on the board of trucking company Navistar International and founded his own consulting firm. Navistar has made billions of dollars from contracts supplying vehicles to the military and has even been accused of defrauding the government. Just a few months ago, the company agreed to pay $50 million to settle a case alleging executives swindled the government of nearly $1.3 billion by, quote, wildly inflating the costs of mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles used in Afghanistan and Iraq between 2007 and 2012. That's precisely the kind of war profiteering that the U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction has shown proliferated in the country as the U.S. relied on private companies to build the military and institutions there. McChrystal also sits on the board of Siemens Government Technologies. Leon Panetta appeared on CNN with John King to lament a, quote, Bay of Pigs moment, but was referred to by his previous government service for Democrats rather than as a senior counselor to Beacon Global Strategies, an international security firm. Former Bush administration Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice took to the pages of the Washington Post to argue for more time. She wrote, 20 years was not enough to complete a journey from the 7th century rule of the Taliban and a 30-year civil war to a stable government. This is what she wrote, yet eliding the U.S. role in toppling its pre-Taliban government. Quote, 20 years may also not have been enough to consolidate our gains against terrorism and assure our own safety. We and they needed more time. She was described with her government titles as well as a current one, director of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Left off the bio was her service on the board of C3AI, a defense contractor. Now, a quick thank you to some of my Intercept colleagues who helped last night do the research on this, Sarah Sirota, Zach Castle, Paul Smith, and Rose Adams. We'll have an article up at the Intercept later today. But Alyssa, I wanted to get your take on this. What do all of these ties to the defense industry do to U.S. military policy, U.S. foreign policy, and how does it help shape our understanding in the media of how these things are unfolding?
So there's a lot to unpack here, and excellent reporting, Ryan. It's no question, it is a fact that most folks who leave the government national security space then go on to for-profit corporations that oftentimes end up making quite a bit off of our prolonged engagements. You'd referred to the SIGAR, the Special Inspector for Afghanistan report that did talk about how some of these private companies helped prolong the crisis and actually were costing the U.S. government more than they could have. I think these are worthy ties to look at. I mean, listen, if you have expertise on the government side of this, of course, you're going to go take it, and you have every right to the private sector to make money off of it. That said, I think that one of the biggest questions we are going to have to ask, and we need to see in congressional hearings, is how after 30 years, after what's closer to $3 trillion in Afghanistan, what was that spent on? Why were the Afghan security forces not more prepared? And we do need to question some of these defense industry ties that they were providing weaponry, they were providing resources, yet we weren't even in a place to secure the country after 20 years. So all very valid questions. Right.
And the other funny thing, Kim, is that a lot of these people will go on cable news and talk about how corrupt the elite were in Afghanistan. It's like, oh, you're against corruption, huh? Interesting.
Right. You know, when I hear them, and especially Condoleezza Rice, reminds me really a lot of the Crusades. You know, I feel like we are embarking on a modern day version of this where we're trying to stick around for, and she's saying, well, this just wasn't enough time to convert people essentially from the 7th century way of thinking all the way up until, I don't know the exact quote there, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say here is that, saying, well, we've got to stick around indefinitely. We need to go back. We must, because we have to stop this radical Islam, or we've got to stop these terrorists, or, we need to get people sped up into our way of thinking of democracy. And so, it just goes on and on and on. But the ties that you bring up are really, really important. There's this undertone of money all the time. People are just making money. And, I hear what you're saying, Alyssa, with, well, they do have the right to leave the government sector and then go take their wealth of knowledge and use it in the private sector. But there's got to be some questions where, from the perspective of the American people, we're sitting here wondering, shouldn't there be a wall between these folks? Shouldn't there be some sort of maybe you can't go and leave for the profit private sector, but you can maybe go for the nonprofit private sector. I just think once you become a government servant, you kind of have to stay one for at least a while, a couple of decades, maybe even. I mean, I know that sounds maybe too controlling, but
it's an interesting point because they're getting very rich on the back of their public sector work. So the public paid them and trained them. It is quite literally their experience in the public sector that the private sector is paying so handsomely for. So to me, the public has a right to that. You could argue that if you jump from the public sector to private sector and the private sector that you're in relies entirely on public dollars, then your income should be taxed at a massive rate. Something where you can only say like double your salary from the military, because that's taxpayer money that you're making your money off, and it's taxpayer money that made you as valuable as you are to the, quote, private sector.
Well, just a couple things to play devil's advocate, though. Most of these people were such senior roles that they brought significant expertise before they were ever given government appointments. A Condoleezza Rice, for example. But I would say this, you've kind of got to bifurcate the two, because there's a very, very legitimate conversation to be had about the influence of the military-industrial complex and how it leads us into never-ending wars. And I've been accused of being a shill for the military-industrial complex, so I'll be careful. I just want to make this point to kind of bifurcate the two. You've got, the worst case scenarios, the Blackwaters, that are literally profiteering off of warfare and off of human rights abuses. Then you do have very legitimate companies, major companies that play a role in creating the cutting edge technologies that we need to be able to fight the wars of the future. So I don't want to just across the board demonize the work that, a General Dynamics or some of these different companies do. But I totally agree. I would maybe position it differently, but that there needs to be a wall between government service and then profiteering off of it. And the biggest thing, frankly, to me is disclose it. Right. That should be part of your bio. I always make it a point, if I've consulted for somebody, to share that with any outlet that I'm, speaking with. And that's what's missing from this. A CNN and a Fox, they need to give that disclaimer.
And I forget which one, either McChrystal or Petraeus worked for Academy, consulted for Academy, which is what they renamed Blackwater after it had to be renamed for all of the reasons that we remember. But I think that the cable anchors should say, we're now bringing on Leon Panetta, who is a senior counselor for Beacon, which name the defense industry firm that they're consulting for, so that viewers can then can then absorb the analysis that they're hearing in that context. Oh, Keene wants to extend. He thinks it was wrong to withdraw. He wants to stay till next year. Well, that's interesting.
And I take it a step further and say, I also want to know how much money they made. I would like that in print as well next to it.
I think that's fair. The public, I think, has a right to that information, since the public created the value that they're cashing in on now. But Alyssa, I'm looking forward to your radar next.